right, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today for our facilities meeting. And I believe Keith will be joining us in just a moment. So we'd like to start with a presentation given by the Schrader Group. If you'd like to begin, feel free. Whenever is good.
After that, I'm taking this away from you.
Okay, well, thank you. So tonight's presentation is intended to bring everybody up to speed on what has been happening for the last 2 months on the Neidig Elementary Additions and Renovations project. And we're kind of, in all transparency, trying to bring you everything that we've done to date so you can all look at it and get a sense of it and kind of react to it. That's really what the intention here is. We have some, I understand the board has set aside some time to have a little discussion. Probably take me about 20 minutes to go through the presentation part. And then we'd love to open it wide open for conversation. That's really what this is all about. So we're going to talk about some numbers that were published, I think, last November, December, and what they meant. And then we're going to talk about the building that really is the most relevant to what we're trying to do at Neidig, which is the Poff Elementary School project. The two have very similar programmatic needs, and they both have very similar capacities. So we'll try to share with everybody what that means. We've had some very good meetings with the townships to try to get up to speed and to try to share with them where we think we're going to be going with things, and have a representative or two in the group here as well. So that's very helpful to have that conversation. Then we'll go through 3 options that we've come to at this point. And when I say options, these are really, really conceptual level, because we're really just trying to get the ball rolling up the hill here, and it's a bit of work to do that. We have enough information, though, that we've been able to develop some budget estimates, and probably the budget estimates are really, really interesting to the folks on my left. So we'll bring some of those to the table here and try to share where they came from. And then we have an option comparison chart so that people can begin the process of analyzing what makes sense to the district as a whole. So we'll start out here with the initial budget, and probably a little small on the screen, but you'll remember about 1.5 years ago, and actually it's almost 2 years ago right now, the first part of the facility study came to the board of directors, and the board had to start to look at all of the analysis of each of the buildings across your entire spectrum of facilities. And at that time, what we were looking at was the pure construction cost just to do the renovation in place of the different buildings. In other words, to bring them up, bring the existing building the way it stands back up to the way that it needs to be from a system standpoint, from an ADA standpoint, and so on. No programmatic changes to the buildings, no increase in size of any of the spaces to allow for any kind of educational change, nothing. So to bring Neidig Elementary just back up to speed, meaning new roofs, new windows, new HVAC systems, all ADA accessibility, and so on, believe it or not, it's about $10.5 million in public bid dollars. There's always questions as to where that comes from. We have entire books together that identify each of the items that needs to be done in the buildings, and it really kind of compiles all the numbers from top to bottom so you can see that. So it's a pretty big number. However, it's a building that's pretty strategically located in the district. It's one that people thought was an appropriate building to bring up to speed at some point in that mix. So the next part of that was there was probably 8 months worth of redistricting discussions, and it's actually not redistricting. It was a conversation about what you do with the next step of all the facilities in the district. There were 2 committees put in place, and one of those committees came back with the proposal to take Neidig Elementary as the next building that you would look at as a district, again, strategically, and to try to absorb some of the students from some of the buildings or the building that is closing at this point. And so what we did here was we were asked only to say, take those costs, that $10.5 million total cost, and add to it purely 10 classrooms. And what does that 10 classrooms equal in total cost to do? Did not talk about modifying the program so it was anything like Poff, did not talk about any of the other renovations that would need to be put in place to make that building equivalent to something like Poff. And so ultimately, when we did that estimate, and I'm going to have to turn, the number is $20,282,000. Every time we present numbers like this, it's really quite unbelievable how quickly they grow. And if we don't share numbers of this magnitude, we end up getting in a lot of trouble down the road because numbers just keep escalating as you start to add things up. But what I'll share with you is that our worksheets typically take into account all of the categories of spending that a district might have around a building. So we talk about the building construction, the site construction. We try to add escalations in as appropriate. Then we add all of the design type costs that go into it, including all of the code reviews, land development approvals, and so on. And then all of the miscellaneous costs that go into that, including furniture, technology equipment, any kind of legal, commissioning, construction management, all the things that factor into trying to build a building in the public spectrum. And it typically is more than us adding to our houses. So that's the challenge always. And I only share that with you because we use the same sort of worksheet for all of these renovation costs that we share from this point forward. So keep that in mind. That number was a little over $20 million just to do those baseline renovations and to add 10 classrooms to the building. Okay, so that was the first step, and then the board decided that they would like to pursue the renovations to NIDIG and the additions and said, go start working with the folks at the school district and go start working with the folks in the building. So we began that process in earnest really in January. And again, a lot of numbers, but what this shares with you is that the existing POF Elementary, existing total square footage is 85,000 square feet. And I'd ask that you keep that number in your head, 85,000 square feet, for a building that essentially accommodates about 600 students. And that's what we're trying to put into the new NIDIG. Yep.
Lisa, do you know how many students we actually have?
Yeah, and that's a good number. You've utilized some of the classrooms for other uses for the meantime, but if you pack that thing back full, you could get approximately 600 in there. As you come up with that, I'll keep going until you tap me on the back. So the existing NIDIG building is 45,700-ish square feet, and it accommodates a maximum of about 434 students. And Scott, I believe you have 402 students there today. Right, so that's part of the issue.
477 of our enrolled students, but I have to look.
So you'd be able to accommodate the 477 plus whatever each of those classrooms at the IU space currently are using. So that just gives you kind of a comparison of where the building is. As we did the analysis, on the left-hand side are all of the spaces that are in POF. On the right-hand side are the spaces that are in NIDIG. And the first thing that comes to view besides adding the classroom quantities is you start to see that you're missing things like art classroom, music classroom, gymnasium, because right now the building is a multi-purpose space. So your cafeteria, your gymnasium are all using the same space, which the principal can accommodate at the moment, but as you expand your populations, it's very difficult to schedule phys ed programs and lunches and so on. And so a building like that, which is POF, starts to have two spaces because you need both of those spaces in order to accommodate that. We still at 477? Okay. So bottom line is, as we went through this programming process, we recognized that there were a whole series of spaces missing besides the 10 classrooms to accommodate the additional student count. So that's the first step. Second thing is we went through and did a full analysis of exactly what the POF floor plan has, what the spaces are being used for, etc. And as a group looked at the spaces that made sense to carry forth in a NIDIG elementary addition and renovation, and which did not. And the majority of the spaces are spaces that we carried through to the next step as well. And went through a whole programming process where we went line by line, and this is actually a 10-page document. You're seeing the total at the bottom. As we went through and tallied up all the spaces that the district would like to see for a 600-student building, the number came to 87,000 square feet, right around the 85,000 for POF. So the bottom line is the programs essentially align, the total square footages for the two buildings align, and you're essentially off the path, or you're down the path of trying to create a building that's similar to POF. Long way to get to that point.
Looks like there's 4 or 5 classrooms so I'm having trouble determining.
So 5 times 25 would be 125 plus your 477 is 600 students. So that's essentially, they're essentially apples per apples there. So when the two programs were run, ultimately what we found, and it was nice to see all of our spreadsheets tally up, the POF Elementary at 85,000 can accommodate the 600 students. The proposed NIDIG, at least the program, showed approximately 87,000 for 600 students. So essentially they're similar size buildings once you're finished with them. So we set down that path and started to do a series of concepts and started to really look at what this site was composed of. And this is probably the most interesting part of this project, because normally when we're given a nice big flat site like that, we have all kinds of opportunity to build. Couple constraints there. One major constraint, and Chris from Boucher and James is going to help me through some of this, is should I say, the creeks on either side of the property and what kinds of flood plains that creates. And the second is it's over 2 parcels, and the 2 parcels happen to be in 2 municipalities. So we went to Richland Township and we went to Quakertown Borough, and we had a commingled group in the Quakertown Borough meeting to talk about what we could do with the property line and all the setbacks. Because the interesting thing is the Richland Township setbacks are to the point where they create this little tiny buildable area in the middle of the property that essentially allows us to, if you followed all of the zoning ordinances, to have a very difficult time putting any construction on that site. The borough allowances of setbacks from the property lines allow quite a bit more opportunity for building. But suddenly you have to figure out how you can figure all of the 3 major elements of an elementary school building program. And the 3 elements being bus drop-off, parent drop-off and parking, and then the building. And then, of course, in and amongst all of that, and very important to that, are the play areas of a building like this. So those are all of the elements that we start to think about how you place them around on a site like this. So we went to Richland Township. The meeting was held March 13th. Very good conversation about looking long-term and making sure that whatever we do is a 40-year solution to the project, or essentially bond issue plus solution to the project. Had a lot of discussion about bus and car circulation patterns on the site, and the preference was that we try to separate the two, which we would do in any good elementary school project. And the hope was we could do one kind of in the back of the building, one kind of in the front, so the car and buses are separated, particularly when you think about how many families drop their children off today compared to what they used to be. Used to be a bus traffic that we worried about. Today we worry about the car traffic. And the challenge of the property line between the township property and the borough property. So Richland Township suggested that if the majority of the building were perhaps in the construction side of the Quakertown Borough, that perhaps we would put all of the approval process through Quakertown Borough, and then it would be kind of ratified by Richland Township. So that sounded like an appropriate solution to that. Quakertown Borough, we went to on March 20th and had the same discussion, and Richland Township sat in on that and essentially came to the same conclusion, that if there's a way to do this, we would like to try to look at the site as one whole. And that's an appropriate way to look at it, and it helps the district a lot if we can go down that route. How we do that, we have to have a discussion. Yep.
Them to divest themselves of that portion of the track that's theirs, and is that no longer a topic of discussion?
Those were early discussions until everybody realized what it really means to move a municipal boundary and what kinds of challenges that provides.
Good enough.
Yep. So now we'll get into the options and share what we know, and you can all kind of pass some judgment on some of these topics. So we have Licking Creek here, Tehican Creek at the top here, and then the building. And you'll see in the next slide, you'll see Penrose Avenue, and you'll see Erie running this direction. So north, for all of you, is actually going right to left. So the left-hand side is north. We oriented it this way because we started to work on the building from this perspective so you could see how you access things. Now, as we really got into this, of course, you're pretty close. You're somewhat up against the adjacent properties here with the front door of the current building. And then if you were to look at this and you didn't see the property boundaries, you'd see all this area behind the building that looks like it's an opportunity for potential development. See the left-hand side, which is potential, and you see the area by the creek, which looks like a potential. As the surveys were done, we began to understand what not only the floodway, which is basically the water course of the creek, but the floodplain creates on the site. So everything from the dot to the right is more or less very, very difficult to develop, and particularly difficult to develop if you're trying to maintain a schedule for a construction project for a school. So this created some challenges as to where you position parts of the building. You're seeing a variety of property lines that run around. We understand that we may have to check a couple of these lines, but the survey and the current deeds point to this being the property lines that run around. And more interesting is the property line that runs between the borough and the township right here. And again, as we all began to look at the site at the very beginning, everybody thought, hey, great piece of property, we have all kinds of addition area here, until you see a property line pop up. So that creates a challenge, and the floodplain area creates a challenge. Chris, so far so good?
So far, yeah.
Okay.
Question.
Yep.
In the floodplain area, would elevation of any potential building?
Yeah, do you want to answer how that really works?
It would, right. And you could probably, even looking at this map right here, you can see the floodplain line is drawn through the existing building. And the floodplain maps, the current floodplain maps are shown, it doesn't take into account when the building addition was completed 30 years ago. The building addition is actually raised 2.5 feet above the elevation of the floodplain. If the map was going to be redrawn correctly, it would show the actual floodplain going around the building and through most of the paved playground area in the back. By elevation, the existing school there, it's above the floodplain, it's not really in that way on the deed.
Building that we would do within that quadrant,
It would have to be above the 100-year floodplain elevation.
but that could be done, correct?
It could be.
However,
There are certain conditions. I don't know if we want to talk about them now or wait until we get into the different options.
well, it kind of runs through the rest of the discussion, so it's worth saying.
There are some, and even some of the options tonight, like especially option C, shows part of the building within the floodplain. Especially with borough and FEMA, if you are going to be doing any work in the floodplain, there will be additional analysis and permitting required. And one of the conditions would be you're not going to raise the flood elevation in that area, especially the impact. That would have to be part of the analysis and part of the permitting. Hey, could we do it? We cannot answer that right now until a more in-depth study was complete.
Thank you.
So that kind of gives you a sense, and right now what the principal is dealing with is circulation through this parking lot and apparent drop-off through a back parking lot here. So people are kind of converging, and this is kind of the crux of the circulation pattern right here. It's an interesting spot. Any building that we do today, we really try very hard to separate car and bus traffic. And then the second part of that is we try to create stacking lines for the car traffic as far off of a public roadway as we can, because we try not to tie up local traffic patterns with cars if we can avoid it. There's always ways to weave through parking lots and create circular patterns through with cones and so on, but as much as we can create length, we try to stack on-site rather than off-site, as all of the old buildings used to not allow for. The other
I apologize for the interruption. I just wanted, I meant to mention this earlier on, but just want to let the audience know that this meeting is being recorded, just to make everybody aware. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's great. Thank you. The other thing that we really started to recognize as we looked at the two sides of the site, because we really looked at the building from the Penrose Avenue site from the beginning, and recognizing that this has a somewhat urban feel as you kind of approach it. It's got buildings on either side, there's always buildings close to it, and there's a sense of I'm in the borough, it feels like I'm in the borough, I'm on borough streets, and so on. When you cross that bridge, you're in a much more rural and suburban area. And it's interesting because somebody challenged us to take a look at the building as if you were approaching it from this side, and what does that mean to the building? Because we started to potentially set up a bus loop back there. And the interesting thing is, if you looked at the building from that side and you did additions on that side, and I'm just talking about everything that we talked about as a group, you'd set up something a lot like POF. In other words, the approach to it would look like POF. You have a long driveway to it. You have some stacking distance on the site. It would feel more suburban than it would feel urban. And so those were two conversations that we started to have about what this building might be from the front or the back. High-level conversations. Here's the existing building. The library is there today. This is the current multi-purpose room. It's undersized for any typical gym purpose, and if you went to 600 students, as it stands, it's undersized for a dining space. If you remove the stage, interestingly, it is large enough for dining for 600 students, according to basic standards of about 15 to 16 square feet per student. These are all the classrooms currently running along the front corridors here, and then some additional classrooms at the back. Right now they have art and music on a cart, and so those kinds of programs are not in a classroom specifically assigned, and then they've used every closet they can for small group instruction space, which we try to assign today appropriate spaces, and even some bathrooms. So, so that's the existing plan, and as we looked at this, what we tried to do was to always look at that cafeteria as either a that multi-purpose space is either a cafeteria or even a potential conversion to a media center. And then what always ended up happening to get the appropriate square footage for a gym was we added a gym. So what you're seeing in each case are the additions of the classrooms to allow us to get music and art back in, and then a gymnasium space attached in some way or another to the building. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time in the plans because they're still being worked on. Just know that the square footages are all pretty close to that original program. So this is the, well, we went through a bunch of options, but right now we're at 3 of those multiple options. This in the red is the existing building footprint. And what you're seeing to the left of the building, if you looked at the building from the Penrose side, is a 2-story classroom addition. Okay, in each case, we're looking at 2-story classroom additions to try to allow for the appropriate square footage on the site, while still keeping the footprint as small as we can. And then you're seeing a gymnasium space tucked off behind, and we have a couple circulation points. The circulation point off of Erie is essentially a bus loop in this case, and then this would be faculty parking. And those two can coincide because faculty come in before the buses drop off, the buses then pick up at the end of the day, the faculty leaves. So those two can coexist. The front side, you also own this parcel, so what we were trying to do is we were trying to allow for a longer parent drop-off loop, and potentially you could pull the loop up as far as you want, or even reverse the direction and try to find a way to do a loop through the lot somehow. So there's a variety of ways to try to stack off of Penrose with this version. And again, all high level. We'll do some real refinement as we go on all of these.
Has Levy been a party of any of these discussions?
That's a good point. I think that it would be prudent to do that.
I'm just saying, I see the bus loop off of that. I'm looking at the aerial. That's Elm Street. Elm Street's a one-way out of that area.
Mm-hmm.
We're at the bad corner coming into Quakertown, if you know that area. So I'm just, I've kind of flipped through all of your options, and it looks like that kind of a loop structure in the back is a goal. I'm certainly not going to about this. Discussions with Levy ought to be had to some degree because it's their buses that are going to have to negotiate where you're sending them.
Right. Right. And all of those will happen. We just want to start to get through the beginning of this process. Okay. But very good point. And then we would figure out how to locate play areas. You can continue to use the hard surface play area. We would look at soft surface play areas, and then you could continue to have playing fields. So all of those are opportunities with this particular layout. In each case, we're trying to keep some kind of circulation route in the front, and you'll see there's a circulation route at the back in each one. Challenges to continue to discuss are what the bridge really allows for. We have width that accommodates what we need to do here, but we have to look at what the roadway really allows for, and of course we have to look at how it affects the neighbor's driveway as well. Just a high-level plan. There would be potentially what we're looking at is in all of the existing classrooms, a K1 structure. The 2, 3, 4, and 5 clusters would all be off in the addition at two stories. You'd see gymnasium at the main entry and the conversion of the multi-purpose or all-purpose room into a dining space with a kitchen behind, leaving the library the way it is and a STEM art center and then the music, so that there's kind of a music art area, there's all of the loud spaces, and then your clusters of classrooms are all off of the central core. So that's essentially the goal of this one. Main entry, main office being from that Penrose drop-off. What's that? Yes, that's correct. Yep. Just the second floor to give you a sense. So then we went down another road and said, how could we add into the Richland Township side of the property? And putting aside setbacks and the other challenges of the site, we were trying very hard to stay out of the floodplain. And so what happens in this case is we said, well, what if you converted the library space to the main office and you created a 2-story classroom wing into the Richland Township property, and in the borough you just add the gymnasium, and this is a different way of looking at this, and you kind of have to adjust your thought process. This becomes the bus loop, and this is the back of the building. This becomes now the front of the building with the main office, and what that then has to absorb is the parent drop-off at the front and a much larger parking structure there. So if you can kind of drive to the other side of the site, look at the building from Erie down through the trees and kind of picture that as a new front door and a new front entry. And what we were trying to do was we were trying to avoid the floodplain, and that's why you see this setback as it is. The interesting part of this, or not, is that when you do that, you create some kind of structure that connects these two, and I won't get into what all of the concepts are here, but there's some additional cost in that area because it's additional square footage. So when you see the budgets, this one has a little bit higher cost than the others because of that. 2 stories. What happens in this one is the K1 stay down here, 2, 3, 4, 5 up here, main office is in the center with the arts and the musics. You convert the current all-purpose room into a library, and then the dining is a new addition with the gymnasium, and we try to structure a stage that works between the two. So just another way of looking at the site. Went through this plus a series of other concepts and said, is there some other way of looking at this? And in this case, what we tried to do is to get rid of this bar that runs across the property line and tried to put it against the building here. So that light gray area now is a 2-story classroom wing. And the main office could go either here, and thus this would be the parent drop-off, or the main office could go here, and this would be the parent drop-off. And in either case, if the parent drop-off came off of here, you'd have more parking on this side, and that would be that somewhat suburban approach that we talked about to the site. Or you would do what you saw in option A, which is put more parking over here, and you'd put the main office in one of the renovated areas. So kind of an interesting concept. You do add the gymnasium back here, and you end up with the cafeteria in the center. I'm going to go back to the site plan in a second, but there's a gym addition. The all-purpose room stays and becomes a cafeteria. You keep your library as it is. This is a 2-story structure. This building, this concept, pops across the property line, but probably more importantly, it runs right through the floodplain. So this one is a little bit challenging from a permit and approval standpoint, and yet it kind of creates these 2 parallel wings, one with 2 stories, one with 1 story, and then play areas all kind of get absorbed there and off to the left-hand side. So that's another way of looking at the site. This bar can slide up or down. The more you slide it towards the creek, the more challenging I think it is for Chris to get any kind of approval from Army Corps on that.
So yeah, the more impact to the floodplain.
So 3 very different ways of looking at the site. We have looked at the site in a variety of other ways too. These were the 3 most reasonable ideas that came out of all of the discussions and concepts we've had for the last month and a half. Always open to other ideas. Using that same budget worksheet, we worked through all of the square footages. The option A is about 43,000 worth of renovation, 44 of addition. Each one is a little bit different in terms of addition, because you're either taking some of the existing building down and adding, or you're renovating more of it. So they all have slightly different costs to them. Option A version, the grand total is somewhere in the neighborhood of $27,400,000. This is where I duck and start to run. The option B budget is the one that is slightly larger. It's actually around 91,000 square feet. The other 2 are that 87,000 square feet that we talked about for program. So this one is as high as $28.5 million to make that work. And then the C, the last one we shared with you, is under the 87,000 square foot mark, almost at POF's number, and it's $27.2 million to make that work. So all of that, that's a lot of information to pop in front of you. We put together a chart to begin to have the discussions, and we looked at the things that we think are important, knowing also that effect to the neighbors is important. We understand that, and we'll continue to talk about that. But we talked about, from the building standpoint, what does it mean? We know we've got to talk about staff feedback, and Scott has been working back and forth with his staff on the options, and he can share his feedback on that. We talked about a more urban feel versus a more suburban feel, and how each of the options affects those or is affected by them. The volume of parent drop-off from Erie versus Penrose, and what each of those options represents. The impact on the floodplain, the variance and approval risk, the impact on the project schedule, and then the cost. The playground safety is one that we're discussing a little bit, because the concept that we've been talking about is, if all the kids are out on playground, we want them to be further away, if they can be, from a parent drop-off where somebody could come in and do a quick grab, quite frankly, of a child. And so the concept of playground safety discussion has been, how can we separate the two more and more? And so we have a TBD there, because as we go through each concept, we think we can shove the playgrounds around so that they are not necessarily affected by that circulation route. So we'll keep talking about those. The interesting part, though, is the option C. As we said, there is a pretty significant impact on the floodplain, which will have a variance approval risk, which will create potentially an impact on an overall project schedule. And then you can kind of see the either's and the no's or yeses are depending on where we set up the main office for that option C. So we would continue to talk about that. The rest of this is how to go forth. And so maybe what I should do is halt for a second and start to get some feedback, and maybe then I can talk about going forth. Is that reasonable? Okay. Anybody want to start with concept discussions or ideas?
The concepts are really providing the room that we're looking for.
They are.
Okay.
And in each case, trying to provide the equivalent of a POF.
The driveway and property lines and all that.
That's a discussion we want to continue to have. Sure.
So in 1994, if you want to go to one of the options that shows the property line.
Maybe start with A.
Yeah, whatever. I like A, actually.
Okay.
I'm Ted Wassemer. I'm 419 Erie Road. I border you guys from 212 all the way to Erie Road. So, this part right here was deeded to Erwin and Nancy Cully in 1994. There was a lawsuit between Quakertown Community School District and the Kellys, and it was given why or how, but I have it on the deed and I have the court documents for that. I have no issue. I love Natick. I went to Natick. I'm a Natick duck, and all my children went to Natick, and that's why I bought the Kelly property, because I was there when Mr. Kelly used to land his helicopter from the barn. But if you were to go out towards on option A, I see the jog in the building. I don't have any issues with deeding some of that property to you guys for the setbacks. You don't have to put the jog in the building, which I think would have a considerable savings for the construction. We can talk about that. I just, I want to make sure certain other things happen as far as like light and, of course, the driveway and things like that affect my approach to my house. And those are all conversations. And also, Jason here is a neighbor right there at the corner, so that can be discussed. Like I said, I have no issue. I was out there walking the other night, and I've been talking to Scott about it a couple days ago or a couple weeks ago, and I have no issue. Like that corner there, I think I have no problem lopping that off and deeding it back to the school so you guys can build the building correctly. I have to talk to my wife a little about that.
And you're talking about this corner.
It's a corner. It doesn't do anything.
And you know this, but for others, the notch is there because it actually works around the setback for the property line.
That probably cost you $250,000 to put a notch in a building like that. So I have no issue with, I just want to have the 2-story gymnasium and everything that kind of pushes towards the barn, because my residence is up in here in the upper corner. There's a farmhouse.
Which one's yours? Is it this one?
No, that's the pool house. Yeah, it sounds first world problems, right? Pool house and guest house, and that's the residence up there.
Okay.
And then the red barn. I debate the property line going through the 150-year-old barn. So I mean, my survey shows something much different. Not much different, but different.
It's worth comparing the two.
Yeah, and I'll provide that to you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'm excited about the renovation. I just want to make sure it fits in and doesn't have a huge impact on my property and rural feel of my property. That's why I bought it. Yeah. And also the value of the property. And my neighbors. So.
Thanks for your willingness to work with us and help us out. We really appreciate that.
I think, like I said, I'm excited about it. I just want to make sure it fits in, and I want to kind of keep you away from option B or whatever goes straight out. So.
And it's worth going to that with you here, because that's this one.
Yeah.
That runs outside of the.
Yeah. Good. I look out my front door and see that.
You're not looking for naming rights on it.
No.
Just
can if you want. All right. But yeah, like the corner back there. I mean, we can figure something out. I have no issue with that.
I'm Jason Munn. I'm 425 Erie Road. So my property, if you could flip back to maybe the Google Earth.
Yeah, let's do that.
There.
Whoops. Too fast.
All right, so on the property left.
This one?
Yep, there we go.
Okay.
So when we purchased our house a couple years ago, I grew up in Iowa, moved into Richland Township because of that rural feel. Just had twins 6 months ago, so my kids will be attending elementary. I'm excited about the renovations, bringing it up to that new age classroom. At the same time, we've got that beautiful little nature preserve there because area. So you take that out, and now the view from my deck is hardscaping, lights. Option A. You take out the lacrosse field, and you've got that all for faculty parking in the bottom left, correct?
Well, they're using it as
last year.
Yeah, last year.
You've got a line field out there.
Oh,
You got a football field that looks like it's now going to be hardscape.
Our elementary kids aren't playing lacrosse, are they?
No.
Okay.
It'd be pretty awesome if they were, though.
Another day. So you're going to bring in this road. What is it necessary to have this parking structure in the back of the building instead of just a loop for parent drop-off? If you're already creating, currently, every faculty member fits in that little area right in the front bus turnoff, right?
Sort of.
Okay.
Pretty close. You couple extra vehicles, might be
It's
street
close.
parking.
I'd say on a given day there could be an overflow.
All right. How many teachers, how many faculty do we expect to add with bringing in?
Hard for me to answer that question. At an IU class, like a multiple disability support, that brings in more staff.
we're looking to add, this would push us. That'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's about 5 or 6 just classrooms, plus additional itinerant teachers, specialists. I can't give an exact answer.
That's fine. I mean, just ballpark. I teach in the North Penn School District as well, so I know a little bit about. Parking structure the size of a football field could easily accommodate faculty, back to school night, any sort of basketball games or home. Is there a need for a full parking structure? Adding in all that hardscaping, half being in the flood zone. Folks coming out from that Erie side just getting, you know, a feel for it. And what we see now compared to traffic all morning, 4 o'clock traffic, everybody leaving, you know, if you're looking for a bus, it goes into that. Quite unpleasant.
And I think one of the things that Chris is going to have to negotiate on everybody's behalf, and that includes yours, is how many parking spaces really go on the site. And again, if you're in education, you know that those few nights that we have to pack a building full of people for whatever reason, finding parking is the challenge. And then there are ordinances that are driving the total parking quantity. So when you look at both of those, we don't want to overdo the parking on the site, because it's parking that stands there and is not used the rest of the time, and yet we want to somehow provide the ability for those nights where you bring in first and second and third grade kids or something like, or parents. So one solution to what you just said is if you did have a circulation route and you got rid of the majority of that parking, you could say at night, well, that turns into parallel parking for those nights, that the 3 nights a year that you have a major group there. And those are the kinds of things that I think are worth everybody having a discussion about at some point.
I think the most important thing is the impact of the community. I think strategically with the closing of Haycock and Teheke, Natick kind of fits nicely right in that center of the district. Again, I'm a big fan of Natick and I don't want to see it closed. I'd much rather see it renovated. But I think that trying to make, you know, we got to look at the impact that it has to the neighbors, to the community, all those type of things. You know, I mean, I think it's going to be a benefit to the community we design. I look forward to it. I agree with what Jason's saying. I think that the parent loop here is a little bit over. I try to challenge everybody from the facilities committee. You know, take a walk, come walk the properties. I'll invite everybody over to my house and we can, you know, barbecue and then walk the property and see what you all think of it. But I definitely think that that big coming off the Erie Road is going to be really, it's difficult. I'd make a left and go up Elm instead of trying to go down Erie Avenue to Ambler because of the restriction with the parking on both sides. You know, if you make a left and you go out towards Thatcher, then you have a narrowed road, you have flooding issues out there. Yeah. I mean, you guys have a, you know, I don't have to tell you what your problems are, you know what it is.
And for that side, I don't think anybody looked at the traffic going that direction. I think they anticipated the majority of it was coming back down Erie the other direction.
Remember, the majority of the Haycock students go to Natick now, am I mistaken in saying that? So those people are going to be coming from the, instead of coming down Robb Road, they're going to continue straight and they're going to turn onto Erie, which is fine.
So there is a percentage that will, you're correct.
You know, and that's fine and that's okay. But again, it's, you know, looking at traffic. And then again, the traffic's only, you know, once in the morning, once in the evening. And then you know, it's only 9 months out of the year, so it's not so bad, and maybe 1 or 2 nights. I think definitely the parking on that side, you know, if you limited that would.
I think just, yep.
Is there any room for expanding the current plan that
the whole parking lot on the left is all brand new?
Yeah. So,
I know that. I'm talking about what is existing already. Increase to.
There's a potential for a little bit more, but that is, as you said, that's pretty tight. Where there is more room is we could really pack that additional parcel on the left-hand side quite a bit more full, and there's opportunity for more development into that one. So if you wanted to bring more forward, you could.
And that would work within the current setbacks?
Mm-hmm.
Joshua, what's the current? What is the current circulation?
Buses come in off of Penrose.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so down by the pavilion side.
Right.
I believe when your kids were going to Nighty, they went out and back.
My kids walk, so it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay, okay. Buses used to go to the
Yeah,
existing
I remember buses
gate.
going out the back, down the back, and they don't do that anymore?
No, that's for cars now. We
Okay.
switched it.
So they just kind of go through the main loop?
Yes, they come through at the very bottom of this picture, they
Right.
drive straight through and come out.
They do the loop, okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in a general concept, for everybody on the committee, to me, it seems like the most reasonable option, mostly because of permanent. There's a number of property as opposed to going in the original. It just sounds but also regarding impact to the community. Your kids go to IE now. We're well aware that the biggest impact to the community, as far as I'm concerned right now, is parent drop-off, pickup, parking in general. The lines to pick up kids, when they were 90, it goes all the way out, what is that? Penrose at Forest Avenue. It'll go all the way up Forest Avenue back to Ambler sometimes. I mean, it's crazy. That being said, I'm also interested in costs under control. That big parking area in the back and the bus loop, I asked Mr. Dodd, will they come in the front and they go out the back? I would hope that unless there's a regulation, even if there is a regulation, we have an existing school with certainly not enough parking on site. Everybody, it's been there forever, it's accepted, there's street parking, there's so forth. We're going to add that big parking on the left. I would rather not have to do anything out back. Frankly, I mean, I know that's asking a lot because we certainly know how bad it is to park and for parents to drop off, but even from an engineering standpoint, that's a whole lot of asphalt that we'd have to deal with from a stormwater management concern. Now, I'm not sure what the township supervisors or the borough commissioners have said about wanting that loop back there, but I'd rather not even put it in back there.
Not have a loop at all.
That whole back asphalt, I
Yeah.
don't want to see it.
Yeah.
I'd rather say everything, the street parking that's there, parent drop off, I mean, it's a nightmare now. The biggest concern is suddenly we're going to jump to 600. So, I mean, I'd love to see it if the engineers and the architects and everybody says we need that. Have it. Well, it's scaled for the circulation patterns the bus need. It can't. That little parking in the center is staff parking, I get that. You're not going to scale it back once you bring the buses in. That, like, the ability for them to turn is not turning on a dime. They need that much asphalt to do their work. So when you put the bus circulation back there, you're putting it all back there. I'm just asking, Mr. Gottschall, you're dealing with buses every day.
Yes.
With this concept, if we maintain the circulation in and out, is that a huge issue as you see it?
I do. I'm thinking now, I'm not the person to say we can't figure it out. You know, we'd still have to brainstorm some ideas for changing the existing flow of traffic. Because right now, cars are coming in from cars are coming in this way and then going out back, dropping off in this area. Kids come in the back entrance, they turn around and they come out. As you can see, the construction in A there's a building there now. We do not have access around the building with a driveway.
Right.
So the whole idea that Mr. Schrader was talking about was separating cars and buses. With, I'm just going to say, with what this possibility, whether it's cars or buses, that's one location, here's the other location. When we start mixing cars and buses together.
But you're already mixing it. I get
buses come in here, cars come in here. They mix in this zone, yes.
Right, and I understand. Here's our chance to solve all our problems. I get it. But I'm saying that we're living with this issue right now. And again, I'm just throwing that out. It's certainly not something like I'd love to see us save that money by not doing it. But if everybody thinks we need to do it, then I'll rely on.
You're kind of suggesting paving more area up front then to
I'm
create
suggesting,
space.
well, if you need, well, I'm suggesting leaving the circulation. Parents, I wouldn't know how to do it, but I'm saying if there's a way to not have that all in the back, I'd love to see it. But again, if we have to, we have to.
And
if you're looking on the
Mouse teacher's got to get up there.
So we've got street coming in here, right?
No.
That's actually just on paper. That's not a real street.
Yeah, that's from the old.
All right. So if parents are already coming in here, you got buses coming through. This is going to continue same bus traffic, right?
Don't know at this point. It could continue just bus traffic. Formerly, that was car traffic. We switched it this year.
All right. But it makes sense because you got this road that goes to nothing down here. So you don't have a lot of traffic down here. You could continue this bus traffic. Kids are getting out on the right. Plenty of space. I mean, how many buses show up?
7 or 8.
7 or 8?
And how many buses do you expect? 15.
We're estimating
That will also depend on the bus routing.
So even if, and I'm thinking about my middle school when they pick up, they've got one dedicated loop that is just for buses, emergency vehicles, but they double stack the buses out here. You have to get rid of this faculty, like all the faculty parking would have to be here. But even if you extended that up a little bit, you got your sidewalk here. I'm guessing teachers have a swipe card or something to get in through.
Yep.
These existing spots, not yours, I guess yours is right up front. But either way, if you would double this up,
Kidding.
you could easily get those, say, 15, 16 buses. Would still have plenty of space, sitting out there at 3:45 or whenever they show up for the kids. If you extended this up, I would think that you've got, according to this, you've got plenty of staff parking. What is proposed?
Well, we think so too. We think we could pull the parking forward if that became
So this could
critical.
pop up.
Yep.
So
Still
plenty
doesn't do
here.
anything for your flow.
So it comes down to where do you stack all the cars and keep them out of the way of the buses?
Right. Where you drop the kids off and keep the buses.
The reason to have it in the back, and you two gentlemen are here as neighbors, Mr. Schrader rightly pointed out, if you look at it from the back, you're in a rural area. Well, I'm looking on street view or satellite image. You go out the front of that building, you're in downtown Quakertown back here.
Yeah.
You're getting thousands of little homes right there, okay? I mean, there's no, I don't think there's anybody here that lives there, but I bet you if they were here, they'd be screaming bloody murder. Put that thing in the back. Get those cars off those roads, okay? So I see where they're coming from, and that's why we need to do it, okay? But again, I'm just looking from a cost perspective.
Has the district considered putting together like a town, help with the design concept and kind of get the community's buy-in on it? I think that's kind of important.
I mean, this is a public meeting.
Yeah, so I understand that they can come here if they want to, but
Right, but at the same time, we're not going to invite the public out to have everybody have a look-see at our engineers or architect plans. That's what these meetings are for.
We do have some involvement currently.
He's talking about the actual figuring out where roads go and things like that, and I think that's a little bit much.
I mean, I agree.
So,
If we can go back to that traffic circulation thing, I just want to add that currently in the borough, it is an issue, and it does back up. I think it's been mentioned already that that's a current issue we're trying to solve. And if you look at what's in the back now, not thinking about the aesthetics of that or how that could be changed, but we're looking at stacking cars on any given day, and it's weather related. So if it's raining, there's more parent drop off. When it's better weather, there's more walkers. But I think we're estimating we're going to have at least 75 cars on any given day with the new population of students. That back loop there gives us a lot more stacking than you have in the front. So it's going to alleviate issues in the borough. It's going to have some other impact in the back in Richland Township, but one of the reasons of having that parking in the back in that loop road is to alleviate the issues that we have now. It's neighbors get their driveway blocked because cars are stacked there, and again, that's just part of a solution we're looking at. Can it be altered? Sure, these are initial high-level plans we're trying to do, but problem solving is where we're at right now.
has the borough seen this and commented on this?
Yes, actually, Doug Wilhelm's here from the borough. He could give you his input.
So we've been involved in some of these meetings, and especially from a borough standpoint, option A is the best. So building code wise, it makes it a little bit easier. Development would be the parking lot and floodplain issues backside. So then we met with Richland Township. Our engineer, which is from looked at it. These same concerns keep coming up with any plan is, do we do that? Do we not? No matter what we do, we're going to have to do a traffic impact study. But options on the front here, front side of where you can, where that parking lot is to the left-hand side. Other ways of creating two loops, a bus loop and a parent loop on, I'm going to call it the borough side, some of this traffic off. But, you know, that's
I'd like to see traffic get off those roads is my question.
the biggest problem is exactly what they said. It's like Forest Avenue, and then they double stack or they come on the road. Somewhere.
Okay.
So the great thing about the fact that some of you folks actually showed up, and we have borough people here as well, is that you begin to talk about some of these things out loud. We don't normally get that kind of feedback, so this is really great. The big question today would be, we've showed you 3 basic schemes. Each one works in varying degrees, and it's really the high-level stuff. Where do you put the 2-story addition? That's the first part. And then how do we create the parking that we need on site with the 2 circulation patterns you just talked about? And so that's why we've shown you 3 very high-level plans. I can guarantee you these will evolve a lot. And I suspect that if you went with an A, you'd start to see this get packed out, because I think that probably has the least impact on anybody, quite frankly, with parking. So we would probably really talk about how to bring as much forward. If this became some kind of loop and everybody in the room reached compromise, and remember what a compromise is, we all leave half happy, right? If that were a potential compromise and it were just a loop, it sounds like it's something we would try to minimize, but there's some value to it for keeping cars off of the road if we can separate the 2 somehow.
Is there really a way to get a second loop up?
There is. There's a way to come in from this direction and do a loop like that and still leave this as a free loop. The problem is the length of stacking. That's really the challenge that we run into. How many cars or how many buses can you really stack up? So,
Mr. Schrader, I'll offer my opinion after watching your wonderful presentation, by the way. Option A to me seems like the best way to go, as long as, you know, we try to work with the neighbors and Quakertown to try to make this work as best as possible, and just as you say, it evolves. But even before we got to this point, option A was what spoke to me, if you will.
If there's any way, I mean, you got time, these are going to evolve, but if there's any way to get rid of that stuff in the back, just from a cost standpoint, we'd save ourselves a ton of money in asphalt back there. if there's any way to do it, you know, nose to the grindstones, make it happen. If it can't happen, then I get it, that we have to put it in. But
Maybe we should get Jeff Bezos involved. Maybe we can drone the kids in.
I'm still waiting for transport technology. Transport technology.
Hyperloop.
That was a joke, everyone.
Back to sticker shock. So I'm not
I'm there with you, buddy.
how the rest of the board is gonna.
How did we suddenly get an extra $6 million?
Yeah, it really came out of the jump from just 10 classrooms to making it equivalent to the spaces that you have at POF. And by the way, I don't mean equivalent to 2-story lobbies and all of these things. I mean the square footage. That's what we're trying to get at. And
like dedicated art rooms and other things
yes.
like that weren't there now.
It's several major parts. It's the art, the music, definitely the gym, and gym automatically has $1.5 million impact, and that's just quick off the top. And small group instruction spaces that are currently shoved into the little closet spaces and so on. Those are probably the biggest components. And if
having classrooms is going to take care of small group kind of places. Do we? I mean, they added art rooms, they added tech rooms, they added other rooms. That's where the money's coming from. I mean, are you?
I'm just saying
it's quite a bit more than I mean, so my opinion as far as I know that we want to have parity as much as possible with POF, but I don't know that it's necessary. You know, from a square footage standpoint, I would like for us to do some more research and evaluation on how we can get, you know, the cost down somewhat. Obviously, you know, this is a school that my son does attend, and so it's very personal to me and important for me that this renovation takes place and is done well. But we are in a situation, as many of you know, where we're facing the possibility of furloughs of staff, and so budget is also a very important aspect of this. Is there a way that we would be able to get more of, and it's still very early, I understand, but more like granular look at the budget to see what, like for instance, the asphalt you mentioned in the back, so we could prioritize and take a look at where the biggest cost drivers would be?
No. At this early stage where you just have colored masses on a piece of paper, you unfortunately are stuck with a square footage cost, and the square footage is based on similar projects within your prevailing wage rate area, which is part of your challenge. If you look north, those prevailing wage rates are very different from your prevailing wage rates. You are tied to the city area. Yeah, you're Bucks County and closer. So that tends to drive the square footage cost. And I didn't mean a quick no other than to say that you will not get a breakdown of a total estimate until there's more development of what the building is.
Are your costs driven a lot by the restrictions in the site? If you had more space, would it be less? If you had
so that's actually a great question. There are a couple things that are driving some of the small changes. One is, you go to 2 stories, there's that break-even point of where do I have just one roof, no stairwells, no elevators, versus when I start to stack it, take up less space, have less roof, but stairwells and elevators. So those 2 are a compromise. So there's a little bit of cost that comes out of that because you are going to pay for elevators suddenly. To the point, though, Chris actually has developed a fairly detailed site estimate because he had enough information that he could do that. So we can probably tell you what that parking loop costs. That's something that we can do. The other thing is, if you said, well, how much did the gym cost, I could do a square footage cost of what a gym costs and tell you exactly what that is, or ballpark what that is. So those are the kinds of things that we can do to help you. It is tough at this stage. I will say that the big difference is that renovation plus 10 classrooms was 64,000 square feet. There's the number. The number is in square footage. It's that times whatever it costs to build a building. And now you're at 85, 86.
So you added additional spaces.
We started to go through the programming process. That's right.
The programming process. You know, we're going to add more classrooms. Programs be done in additional classrooms rather than additional dedicated spaces for those programs. I mean, I just, that's where the driving, one of the biggest cost increases has come from. That's what we're being told. So the question begs itself, can we do that without dedicated spaces, or do we need the dedicated spaces?
And from my perspective, I would have a really difficult time supporting having that many students without dedicated spaces. So we would be unable to serve 600 students in gym if we weren't able to have gym for the entire middle section of the day. You just can't make it work because they would have to be eating lunch while other kids have to be in gym when you have that many students. And so we make it work in some of our smaller buildings because there aren't as many students who need to have those elective choices at the same time. So maybe an art teacher, we have some buildings where an art teacher does have to teach in the cafeteria or in some other space when kids aren't eating. But when you look at having a large number of students and needing them all to take all of those things at the same time, you can quickly run out of that common space or the instructional area. So that's
I think I'll add in here, part of this process, we went on a tour of some of this buildings that the Schrader Group helped build or helped their. So we went to some of these buildings, and I'll use Phoenixville as an example. Beautiful, beautiful. I forget the name of that school.
Well, it's their Phoenixville Early Learning Center.
Early Learning Center. So we loved the building. It was beautiful. Every classroom had an attached small group instructional space. Every hallway had an attached large group instructional space. And when I say large, they were single load classrooms. So the hallways just had classrooms on one side, and the hallway was almost double the size to allow for additional instructional spaces. So we fell in love with that. It was huge. It was enormous. And the more we talked about that, it came to the understanding of square footage, that's additional space. Small group instructional space for every classroom? Do we need a large group instructional space for every grade level? And we kind of came to that understanding of probably not. Would we love to have it? Of course, we'd like to have a lot of space. But you know, some of the models that we're talking about, there are additional small group instructional spaces, not one for every classroom. There is I think there are possibly 2 large group instructional spaces, LGIs, not 6. So, you know, again, I'm saying that with the understanding of there were some of those decisions of what we saw, which was almost palatial. Yes, that would be nice to have, but do we really need that? We're looking at instructional spaces, not a library that's 2 stories that has 8,000 square feet just for the library, then another 8,000 square foot gym, another 8,000 square foot cafeteria.
But you also saw a simplistic building with simple classrooms and no small group instructions and so on. So we kind of went to both sides. And what it comes down to is your district, and you sort of have to look at POF and say, what do I not need there to support the same number of students? And if you can pull some parts out of that, that will allow this to get smaller, because you're essentially looking at the same number of students to serve.
We're not at the point in the project where we can start.
You're not. And what, you know, our job right now is to say, if you're doing something of similar square footage, that's what it costs.
Right.
And if you determine that you want to do less square footage, less program, tell us, we'll reduce that.
If I could, well, that was a little loud, just talk real quick about the budget, because we had a quick conversation about that. I did have a conference call with Jamie Doyle and Melissa Hughes from PFM yesterday, and they are working on what the impact on our borrowing is and what that would look like for us. And they have told me they'll actually have a report for the Finance Committee meeting on the 12th. So I'll bring that so we have that level of detail too. And this is just a recommendation. We only have 4 board members here, and I don't know if David would be available, but if you would be interested, we could invite David back to present something similar to the board as a whole in a regular board meeting and get the word out and invite the community to come in and hear that presentation as well. Because we did just hear these these options. We don't have to make any decisions tonight. So, if you think that would be helpful,
do you really want
to do that?
Having discussions in a public setting with these numbers when these numbers aren't hard numbers yet. You know how it is when you throw a number out there. And
are they going to magically come down? Would we expect them to come down? Unless we, right? So I'm understanding it's directly related to square footage. So we either cut square footage and cut the budget down and do it mediocre, you know, whatever, relative to what's proposed spending today. I don't know. It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure
So I guess my question is, and I don't know how this works. The board approved 20 million, so it's 27.2 now. So it's another 7.2 million. Does it have to go back to the? I mean, it has to go back to the board for final approval.
No, just to clarify, if I can, the board didn't approve any dollar number. The board approved continuing with the project when the board had voted to close Dakin Valley Elementary School. The board typically does not approve a budget. The facilities committee makes a recommendation to move forward with an option. From there, what the board would be approving as we proceed through the projects, the individual bids. So as we go through the plan-con project process and get all the bids in, we would be taking those to the board to approve at that time.
But it was a 20 million. The ask was for 20 million.
Correct. The presentation
was 20 million.
Correct. That's what it said.
So whether they approved 20 million, that was the ask, and I think that was what the board voted on at that point. So
Right.
I absolutely think it needs to go back to. I think I agree with you. I think the full board needs to hear it. I think we actually do need to start talking about it now.
Yeah.
In light of sort of the other budget discussions that we're having that are significant. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree.
So do we want to ask Mr. Schrader if he can come back to a future board meeting to present?
I'm for that.
Okay.
Yeah, what do you think?
And I don't know what his schedule looks like, but I would recommend if, the sooner the better, just so we could stay on timeline with the project.
Yeah, I agree.
So when we talk about sort of cutting out, I think you talked about square footage. Is that parking lot in the back worth $2 million? I don't know.
No.
$3 million.
Several $100,000.
So that's not even that much money.
Yeah, you'll be looking at those things. You'll be looking at a gym that's, a little smaller, and that's worth several $100,000. Then you'll look at, are the small groups really all important to you or not? Those are a couple $100,000. So you'll chip away at.
Yeah, I'm not. Look, don't get me wrong. I want to do it right as well.
Right.
So I don't want to just say, by doing something simply from light of, potentially laying off a significant number of people coming up.
Yeah.
I think we have to have a real discussion about what's the meat and potatoes of what we want to do, and what's the luxury stuff that we want to do.
Yeah. That's my opinion too.
If I could just add in there too, I feel like I need to qualify my statements a little bit. When I talked about Phoenixville, I know that was their ask of that building, of this radio.
Oh, it definitely was. They had that.
They asked for a building built around this library that they wanted. And we visited another school in Bristol Township that did not have those alien spaces. That was their ask of the trade group. So we saw the opposite ends, and we did hear from some of the teachers about that. So that's a difficult discussion item, because programmatically speaking, instructionally speaking, certainly we want more than adequate, but of course adequate spaces. Do we need enormous classrooms that have 150-inch plasma not even plasma anymore, whatever, television? No, it's not that. But we also want to have the flexible instructional spaces that allow our students to learn in that 21st century environment. So that's obviously where we're going to have a lot of discussions, not tiny classrooms with little tiny rows in them, but a flexible space that allows them to grow into a job that they're going to move into.
And how do you get to that? I agree with you. It's a balancing act, and I think that's really
and being fiscally responsible.
I think you can get there. I'm a commercial builder. I build all over Philadelphia. When I budget stuff, it's always off the chart, and then somehow we manage to make it work and maintain the design intent. I think it's important that it get renovated. I think it's important for the community. I think it's important for the district, because it's going to help support our community and attract better tax base, all that stuff. But
so is great. Look, I'm with you as well. I believe in our schools, and I believe in where we need to create environment to attract people back. Someone didn't come to Quakertown where I work because they heard it had bad schools. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. To attract the right people, good schools.
Yeah.
I think tonight's just about seeing, what are the initial options that we have at this point.
Do we agree? We like A better.
Yeah, I do. Mr. Macucci, do you also feel that way?
Yeah, I think it's the best option.
Madam
Agreed.
Chairwoman, would you like to make
A formal recommendation?
a formal recommendation?
Are they ready to accept a formal recommendation yet?
Actually, what that does is that puts us in a better position to keep that budget conversation going, because if you were playing around with several of the options, that becomes even more difficult for
Yeah,
us to
that's fine.
continue down the budget road. So if there's a preference, and if the principal and the administration feel like we can work within that, then perhaps it makes sense to have a recommendation.
Yeah, I'd be glad to make, I think we should move forward with further discussion with option A.
Do you want me to, oh, sorry.
Discussion at the building level with the teachers. I've been collecting a lot of feedback. Josh Mason's here, is one of our fifth grade teachers. There's been a lot of discussion about A, there's been a lot of discussion about C. Both models are really appreciated at this model, I'll be honest, or at this point, I'll be honest with you. There are some pros with C. I think it's B.
Yeah. We changed everybody's saying.
With the structure going out back, there are some pros there. There are some pros with A, if it's staying out front. So, I mean, it's been back and forth, and I don't want to say 50-50. It's been year out there, like A.
You're saving yourself a lot of hassle with the permitting. You're taking out of the floodway, floodplain. I mean, it's just.
Yeah, the floodplain issues,
Yeah.
I deal with that with my own personal home.
And that was more of the new C model. Sorry to go back with C. Yes.
Seems like better, just lower overall risk
Yeah.
with A.
Because we're talking now about potentially what can we do to reduce the cost. I think some of those other plans, they could blow up the cost.
Yeah,
I would agree with you.
Yeah.
They can.
You do it, you can take the jog out of the building.
Well,
We need a helpful neighbor to do that.
that's its own can of worms.
So we,
Dr. Harner and have them come back in and do another presentation, and then
Yeah.
the committee's ready to make their recommendation.
Please, as long as it fits into whatever priorities we have for the agenda, that I say yes.
Okay, and since Dr. Hunter's not here tonight, I'll take that back to him and again, work with Mr. Schrader and Boucher and James and get them to come back for a presentation, and then, the full board can hear the committee's formal recommendations. Sound good?
Yeah.
great,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
you.